And welcome back, rugby fans, to Rugby411. As always, I'm your host. My name is Joshua Shibata, and this is our power rankings after 4 weeks of MLR action in the 2025 season. We are almost we're almost a quarter done with the season. It's been exciting so far. I've been really happy with the way that's been going, and there's been some interesting games. I mean, every week I feel has been some exciting games. It's any given Friday, Saturday, Sunday. We play all weekend with rugby. Any given day, any team can beat any team theoretically. So it's great to see that not necessarily is there any team that is too unbeatable. I mean, granted, we still do have one team left that's undefeated, but it's been some exciting games, so I've been very happy with it. Again, if you've never seen my power rankings before, this is based purely on what happens on the pitch, who you play against, where you play them at. Because home pitch is a thing. Home pitch advantage is a thing. If you're traveling to an opponent and you're able to beat them at their home, I mean that, for in my opinion, counts a little bit more. If you are a lower ranked team beating a upper ranked team, that definitely counts more compared to an upper ranked team beating down on a lower ranked team. There's been instances, I feel even in this case, there is a game or two where if you don't beat the lower ranked team, I don't feel it warrants you going up a spot, even if you did win. So, again, it's all purely based on what you do on the pitch, not necessarily what your record shows. So, the rankings don't necessarily correspond with who is on top of the conference tables, though it usually ends up working out that way in the end. So, without further ado, let's get to it. And of course, we always have to start, unfortunately, with everybody's second favorite team in Major League Rugby, Anthem RC, Anthem Rugby Carolina, sitting still in the number 11 spot. Unfortunately, still looking for their very first win of the season. And man, they, we talk about teams being called the cardiac kids. Miami, Utah are teams like that. But man, we gotta call Anthem now the heartbreak kids. And I don't mean Shawn Michaels, but heartbreak kids, because a lot of their games are just heartbreaking to watch, especially this one, losing to Old Glory DC 26-22, a very close game, and a game where Anthem was ahead a good majority of the game. So man, I in my pick'ems, I really was contemplating about whether or not Anthem was able to steal the win with this one. I thought they had a good chance, but I felt Old Glory would win, and I thought it would be close too. So the 4 point spread, a 4 point deficit, I'm not surprised at all. Again, it just goes to show you that Anthem is on the verge of winning a game, at least 4 games in my opinion this season. This one was definitely a close one. So let's get down to it. Within 20 minutes, Anthem's already up in the game, especially after a beautiful try from last year's MLR Rookie of the Year, Junior Gaffa. So they're up 10-0. Old Glory gets a yellow card, but surprisingly, and again, there's been cards all over this season so far, but surprisingly, after Old Glory gets a yellow card, they actually score with the one man down by Nick Griggs. And then afterwards, Ethan McVeigh also scores for Old Glory DC. But then Anthem, though, scores on a handling error by Old Glory DC from Connor Mooneyham, the number 1 draft pick in the very first 2020 collegiate MLR draft, followed by another try from a Mala score, and Anthem is actually up 22-14 at the half. Unfortunately, then it all falls apart for Anthem. Anthem basically just kind of ran out of gas in the second half. 2 tries by Old Glory puts it away 26-22. Anthem not able to score anything in the second half. 12 unanswered points, and therefore Anthem is still winless in the 2025 season. Another game where, again, it's heartbreak, though it's probably more heartbreak for RFCLA fans. Unfortunately, sitting at number 10 is RFCLA, losing to San Diego in the Cali Cup 36-28. But man, the story here is that Anthem was RFCLA was actually up at the half in this game, and they were looking really, really good. Unfortunately, and it's kind of frustrating as a RFCLA fan because this is what we saw a lot of last season. Penalties and cards really hurt RFCLA. We'll go into the game. A beautiful maul and score by hooker Mikey Sose Fiagai, who is a Cat USA Eagles player, does really, really well in that hooker's position for RFCLA. Unfortunately, though, the first yellow card for RFCLA allows San Diego to score. A beautiful heads-up play, though, by newly acquired Ed Timpson for RFCLA is able to keep RFCLA ahead. San Diego, though, scores at the half, but LA again is able to stay ahead at the halftime. We were up 28-24 at the half. But then, unfortunately, in the second half, again, it all falls apart. Timothy Anstey gets his second yellow card that leads to a red card. And then, just moments later, Semi Kunatani, who finally gets onto the pitch, first time in the game, gets a yellow card for an unsafe high tackle. So, RFCLA down 2 players in pretty much the entire second half of the game. Of course, that's not going to allow you to win. LA was able to get a bonus try from Ed Timpson. That was his second try of the game for a brace that allowed LA to get within 3. They were just down by 3 with only 5 minutes left. Unfortunately, at that point, the numbers game was too much, and Ryan James, who has been phenomenal for San Diego, was able to score on the outside, just like he's been able to do all season, and that pretty much puts it away for San Diego. So LA loses once again to San Diego, 36-28. Again, who knows what would have happened if there weren't those cards at the end. Like I said, RCLA was looking good in the first half. It's just, again, the penalties are just killing them. RCLA is tied for the most cards right now. 2 red cards, 5 yellow cards. Tied with Chicago, who also got a couple cards this week. But unfortunately, the big stat is that even though they're tied with Chicago, Chicago's played 1 more game than RFCLA. So RFCLA tied for the most cards, but they've played 1 less game. So it really is very concerning to see RFCLA struggling so early once again with penalties and cards. We were hoping that with new management that would change, but again, it's been a little frustrating being an RFCLA fan. Now, another game where this one the score was very, very surprising. Utah, who has been looking very hot so far, albeit being very young seasons, only week 4, hosting the Houston SaberCats, who've also looked very good. But I think this is a score line that's really shocking. Utah falls to Houston 37-17, and man, it wasn't even it just looked like that even on the pitch, as it was all Houston pretty much the entire game. Utah barely did anything. I mean, it kind of came alive in the second half. Joel Hodgson was able to score a beautiful try and made the conversion himself. But other than that, not a lot to talk about Utah. We'll talk a lot about Houston. They played an amazing game, and there are a couple players that really stood out in the game. But man, I was really shocked by this one because, again, Utah usually plays really, really well at home. Zion Stadium, a beautiful stadium, a loud crowd. But Houston came in with a message and intent, and they just socked it to Utah to put Utah down. Utah falls 4 spots from the number 5 spot all the way down to number 9 with that loss. We'll see if Utah is able to climb back out next week. NOLA Gold is the only team that had a bye, so they're going to sit at number 8 because I don't really believe in having a team go up or down if they have a bye week. They didn't play, so it takes a lot for me to have them either move up or down. Next game, in a very surprising turnabout. It is the rematch of last season's MLR championship game between the New England Free Jacks and the Seattle Seawolves. It was a very close game, a very interesting game. In the end, Seattle able to get the win over New England. That causes New England to drop from the number 6 spot down to number 7. They only moved 1 spot, and I'll explain why. Because the score line was only 27-24. New England lost by 3 points. But man, if you watch the game, it was kind of I don't want to say it was a lucky win for Seattle, but New England was pretty much in control of the game until the very last moment. I'll talk a little bit more about the Seattle side when we talk about Seattle, but New England, they did everything right. It was just at the very end of the game, they just kind of fell apart. They kind of fell asleep, allowing Malachi Isdale to pretty much walk off the bench and score the winning try. But again, Jason Patros did what he needed to do. New England has been struggling quite a bit this season, and it looked like it's really because Jason Patros hasn't been really a factor in too much of the games, but he was playing his heart out in this one. It was a perfect 3 for 3 off of the tee. But like I said again, it was a very, very close game. Seattle made quite a few mistakes, and again, I'll talk about that when we talk about Seattle. But New England, unfortunately, loses a very close one, but weren't enough to have them just drop 1 spot for our two-time reigning and defending MLR champions. Another team that lost is Miami, who loses a tough one to Chicago, 31-18. They dropped down a couple of spots. This is another game where Miami looked pretty good. It just looked like they kind of gassed out in the second half. They were going back and forth with tries here and there. At the half, Chicago sneaks in a last second try at the end of the half to be up 17-10. Lucas Rumble of Chicago gets a yellow card. So, of course, that allows Miami to score with a try to stay within 2. Miami then takes the lead with a penalty kick. So they're up by a couple of points. 10 minutes left in the game, and Chicago ends up scoring a try and then a couple of more as Miami just completely falls apart. And so they lose 31-18, as I said. And that was pretty much it. So, again, Miami kind of losing a little lopsided to Chicago, who is looking, as I mentioned before, like the team that we always thought they were going to be. They're finally starting to produce right now in the 2025 season. At the number 5 spot is Seattle, who I mentioned before, was able to get the win, their first win of the season against New England. And again, it was very, very close, 27-24. Not that Seattle didn't kind of shoot themselves in the foot quite a few times. The kicking game, surprisingly for Seattle, has been a little bit lacking. In comes new MLR acquire Eddie Fouché, and Eddie Fouché unfortunately going 0 for 3 off of the tee on 3 conversions. And then Rodney Iona, who came in from New Orleans to be kind of a backup fly half, didn't really do any better. He was able to kick a conversion, but he missed 2 penalty kicks. So technically Seattle should have probably been winning by a lot more. There was at least 9, 10, 11, 12 points that were not on the board because of missed penalty kicks and conversions. So could have been a much wider game for Seattle, but there has been some kicking issues with Seattle ever since they have lost Mac Mason. As I mentioned before, might become a huge factor for Seattle with the fact that one of the best players of last season did not come back in Mac Mason. And Seattle, luckily, got the win because, as I mentioned before, Malachi Isdale, who is a USA Sevens player, and he was a crossover player, came in as a former football star, part of the crossover program of getting athletes who don't play rugby into playing rugby. So he got into the Rugby Sevens program, a great talent, literally comes off of the bench with minutes left in the game, scores a beautiful try to steal the win for Seattle. And again, Seattle just barely gets the win, 27-24. So New England kind of losing a heartbreak with this one, and Seattle gets the coffee cup in this rivalry between Coast East and West Coast coffee connoisseurs. I just found out that Dunkin' Donuts apparently originated in New England, and of course Seattle has Starbucks, so that's why we have the coffee cup between Seattle and New England. And then moving on, Old Glory, as I mentioned before, beating Anthem Rugby Carolina. Now, they moved up 3 spots from the number 7 to number 4, but that's purely because of losses by New England and Miami. Now, granted, again, Old Glory did beat Anthem, but, you know, it was pretty much a second half effort from Old Glory, which isn't, there's nothing wrong with that, but they were down, again, 22-14 in the half. And if it wasn't for the second half, where apparently Anthem just kind of lost gas, Old Glory was able to pull away 12 unanswered points in the second half to put away Anthem. Not the most impressive win, but enough to move Old Glory up into the top 4. And along with them are, of course, 3 teams that have pretty much been staying in the top 3. You have Houston, who, as I mentioned before, put a shellacking on Utah. You have Chicago, who had a really great game against Miami. And then, of course, you have San Diego, who put the hurt on RFCLA to maintain the Cali Cup. In these games, I want to mention with Houston, man, 2 players that really stood out in that game. Drew Wild, who scored not only 2 tries, but also got a dropkick goal in the game. Phenomenal player. I believe he was voted the Player of the Week by Major League Rugby. Phenomenal fullback for Houston. And then, of course, David Coetzee, who has always been phenomenal for Houston, scored 13 points himself in the game. So a really impressive win for Houston. And then moving on with Chicago beating Miami. Again, Chicago and Miami were pretty even in the game. Chicago, unfortunately, shooting themselves with getting a red card and a yellow card in the game, but were able to kind of hold off Miami in the second half. Ali Devoto, the former Premiership player who is now with Chicago, was able to get the bonus point try for Chicago to give them the win. And then San Diego, again, when you are down 2 players in the majority of the second half, it's very, very hard to win a game. So RFCLA kind of shooting themselves in the foot. I'm not taking anything away from San Diego. San Diego played a very physical, hard-hitting game. As I mentioned before, Ryan James getting another try in the 2025 season. And San Diego still remains the only undefeated team so far this season. And they sit at the number 1 spot, still retaining their hold on the Cali Cup. Now, with that being said, let's move on to our SuperBru Pick Ems and some interesting developments in this one. So, once again, congratulations to CrossFox, who makes it 2 in a row with the yellow cap this season. 9 points out of a possible 14.5. He and Rugby Morning, congratulations, John, Rugby Morning, coming in second, just 1 point behind CrossFox with 8. Both of them were the only 2 players to get all the games correct. Following closely behind them is a former SuperBru winner, SuperBru Rugby411 winner, MSDR FC 83, Mike. He came in third at 5.75, and then right behind him, tied for 4th, is BT Woodrow and Tex with 5.5. Unfortunately, Julie EGW gets the wooden spoon this week. Let's go over our overall standing. And because of that win, of course, that means CrossFox stays in first place, 24.5. All J Long, our very first SuperBru Rugby411 winner, is still in second with 19.5. But man, Rugby Morning moves up, shoots up 12 spots to number 3, tied with Mr. Rugby, who drops down a spot. He technically stays because he's tied for 3rd, so stays a spot. But Seawolf's Jeep drops down a spot to number 5 with 17 points. Unfortunately, our bottom 5, GMV Rugby at least putting in some picks, so great job GMV Rugby. Unfortunately, still last place with only 4 points. Theo God is in 25th with 10 points. John Hawkins, who is drops down a spot to 24 with 11.5. KDC, 11.75 points, drops 3 spots. And then our reigning defending Rugby411 SuperBru Pick Em's winner, JZS, goes up a couple spots, but is still in the bottom 5. So, again, GMV Rugby, don't give up hope. Just keep putting in the picks. As long as you get some right, you'll eventually move up a couple spots at least. It's still very early in the season. So that's my video. Kind of short this week comparatively for our power ranking videos. But again, when you look at the power rankings right now, kind of shaping up to the way that it kind of looks. You have 3 very dominant teams in the top 3 spots. Old Glory. I know John from Rugby Morning will kind of be mad that I'm kind of questioning them being number 4. But as long as you win, you stay up in the rankings, and that's what Old Glory DC is doing so far. Seattle, though, maybe getting on their winning ways. The questionable one is New England kind of falling apart a little bit. And then we'll see if Utah can bounce back. It was a pretty devastating loss to Houston. That drops them down. And we'll see. We still have 2 teams that haven't won a game yet this season. RCLA and Anthem. We'll see if one of them is able to get out of the bottom. Anthem does have a bye this coming week, so we'll see if RCLA can get their first win of the 2025 season. So, as always, let me know what you think of my power rankings, if you agree, if you disagree. And as always, thank you very much for checking out my video, and I'll see you on the pitch.